Welcome to Outrage Overload, a science podcast about outrage and lowering the temperature. This is a bonus episode about bridging political divides and understanding conservative viewpoints. Have you ever wondered if the perspectives we share on this show lean too far to one side? We heard your feedback, and today we're shaking things up. In our quest to provide quality information from academic circles, we've often featured voices that many of you have identified as left of center. While these guests strive to be balanced, we recognize the importance of showcasing a truly diverse range of viewpoints. And that's what we're going to talk about on this episode of the Outrage Overload podcast. I'm your host, David Beckmeyer, and today we're bringing you a conservative perspective on some of the pressing issues we often discuss, like toxic polarization and the impact of outrage porn. Here to share his insight is a researcher and author known for his thought-provoking takes on political and social dynamics.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Anderson, and I study politics. I've written 4 books about contemporary American politics. I started writing books because I wanted to solve the problem of why the left and right don't get along. So I published my first book in 2017 and my 4th book in 2023.
Michael's work examines the causes and consequences of tribalism and media influence. With his background, he offers a unique conservative viewpoint that complements and challenges our previous discussions. His books include The Progressive Gene, How Genetics Influence the Morality of the Left, The Conservative Gene, How Genetics Shape the Complex Morality of Conservatives, Twilight of the American Experiment, Without Moral Balance, Our Republic Will Fall, and Tribalism, The Curse of the 21st Century. Before we dive in, I wanted to mention that our guest today is not an academic, and their theories have sparked lively debate. Some academics have raised concerns about oversimplification and the use of evidence. However, it's important to note that our guest is a reasonable person, and while we could spend time nitpicking, today's focus is on listening to alternative perspectives. Let's keep an open mind and hear what they have to say. Now, stay tuned as we explore outrage overload themes through a different lens, fostering a more comprehensive understanding of the issues at hand. Let's dive in right now. Well, first of all, thanks for making time to come on the show. Michael Anderson, I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I was going to start off. Do you see some of this amplification of outrage being the culprit sort of being media and social media as part of it, or to what degree? And if so, do you see any ways to sort of maybe roll that back without censorship or infringing on free speech?
Let's separate the traditional media from social media, because the major culprit to me is social media. Never before in human history has there existed a platform where anybody can express their opinion. 25 years ago, if you wanted to advocate for communism, you went to a park and got on a soapbox and talked about it, because you weren't going to really be on traditional media, because why was anybody going to have you on? If you were uneducated, let's say, and didn't know your subject matter, and your philosophy is based on rants, then you don't get a platform. Now everybody gets a platform. So there's not only that, but there's the unfortunate problem where people that are most radical and most boisterous and rant the most can get the most viewers. In fact, people campaign, they try to come up with rants that exceed somebody else's rant, because you might get more eyeballs or listeners to that rant. And of course, the social media companies like that too, because they get more advertising. So controversy creates viewership, which is a horrible negative, because when you put together irrational speech platform with an inducement to expand the irrationality, it's not good.
Yeah. So, so the second half there is, do you think there's anything we can do about that sort of without going into deep censorship or infringing on free speech?
Very difficult to do. The the left has been accused of applying censorship through the media. Well, I mean, I think one of the things I talk about in the book is that most of the communication systems in our country are controlled by the left now. Higher education is controlled by the left. Traditional media is controlled by the left, and the social media are all controlled by the left. And I don't want to exaggerate the word control. I mean, traditional media leans to the left. They're not, you know, radically to the left, but they lean to the left. So there's a tendency for views from the right to be censored or are just not included in the news line. So the social media thing is a big problem. How do you take us all back to flip phones? You can't do it. So I don't know how it's going to be solved unless somehow it gets divided up. I mean, if there were, for example, if there were only paid to listen platforms or something, in some way to keep out people who, just want to rant and have nothing to contribute, maybe. I'm not sure. I don't know if there's any way to control it.
Yeah. In terms of, right, it's a hard problem. In terms of, kind of this, some things you were talking about how, we have journalism is primarily, a left field. I mean, it tends to be, if you just poll who's in journalism, it leans left. Yeah. Same with academia and the professorship. And I'm curious, like, how do you, and some of that is that, there's this natural tendency to just, it steers people one way or the other. If you're, a smart person on the right, you may not look at that field as interesting to you because it's dominated maybe by the left or for other reasons. Right. How do you think we can bring in more of that diversity to those fields, to some of those fields?
Well, it's a good, I mean, you're talking about academia?
Well, both academia and others as well, but those two kind of come to mind.
Well, I think the only way to fix academia is offer alternatives to it. For example, a lot of the conservatives that left academia went to think tanks. So they're basically doing academic work, but they don't have students. So it's a different environment. I don't know how to reverse it because the new university administrations would have to agree that there's a problem, and I don't think they do. Now, it's interesting what's happened with DEI lately because DEI had taken over practically every university in the country, and now there's backtracking about it. So, diversity positions are being eliminated, more in corporate than in higher education, but there's still some progress being made in pushing against it that may be possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it seems like a lot of people, when we talk about some of this, the boiling temperature kind of between the left and right, talk about, well, if we all could just come to the center, and and I don't see that as an answer, and I certainly don't. I think my audience spreads isn't everybody. I have people on the left and right, and I don't think, and I think they can agree about wanting to lower the temperature without saying we should all meet in the middle on every issue. Now, there may be issues where there is compromise. There are particularly things like taxes and things like that where there's a scale and moderation that one can do. But, and I think so, instead of, what do you think about that topic? I mean, are you recommending people drive more to the middle, or how can people hold on to their beliefs and still sort of have this, find commonality in these deeper, either moral. Sometimes I'm kind of confusing maybe moral and value,
right?
But I don't know if you have some thoughts on that.
Sure. Two points I'd like to make. First of all, I think the key to trying to solve the communication problem between the two sides is the traditional Democrat. It's not the progressives. Progressives are about 8% of the population, just like hardcore conservatives are about 8%. That's where all the craziness comes from. But traditional Democrats, I don't know if you'd call them New Deal Democrats or liberals or what you would call them, but there's a significant number of people in that group, perhaps 20%. And surveys have shown that that group does not like tribalism and is interested in communication with the other side. So I think, and it's unfortunate that the perception of the Democratic Party right now is that it's only progressives. And part of the problem there is traditional Democrats don't speak up, probably because they feel threatened. I don't know what the total reason would be, but you don't hear from them. And to me, they should be calling out the left, the radical left, for policies and an ideology that is not good for the country. The second thing I want to add is that you have all the people in the middle who are independents who really don't care about ideology. So they would probably always be interested in talking because they don't have an axe to grind, but they're also not organized and may not be engaged in politics because they're not as motivated by the debate. So you have to figure out how to engage them. But they're certainly available.
Right. And as you said before, there's so many incentives for some of these players, both social media, I also think regular traditional media, as well as, the politicians also leverage this to kind of always seem to give the attention to those extremes on both ends. And, and I don't know if you have thought about any ways to maybe somehow create that space that those moderate Democrats, as you call them, as well as I think, some of the I would say more moderate Republicans can sort of appear again and feel comfortable, right, voicing their opinions.
Yep. Before I answer that, I want to bring up another issue that's an important part of my writing that we haven't touched on yet, and that is the difference in behavior between the left and right. Each side conservatives and liberals have not only attitudinal differences, but they're different genetically. The brains of the right and left are actually different. I mean, for several thousand years, man tried to prove that there was one morality and one point of view that was right and everything else was wrong. When in fact, when you look at the extreme left and extreme right, they're very different. So people have to accept the fact that the other side is different. You're not going to turn a conservative into a liberal and vice versa. You can't do it. So we're different. And part of solving the problem is understanding the difference and accepting it.
Mm-hmm. Well, can you envision any sort of solutions that sort of don't require people to sacrifice some of those firmly held convictions, but still sort of maybe bring the temperature down?
Well, I mean, if you take the extremes out, then there's a lot of commonality to me, because if you take like a traditional Democrat who's not all the way on the left, a traditional Republican's not always all the way on the right, there's commonality there. I think they have more in common politically and probably economically. Maybe cultural issues are a bigger problem. But cultural issues getting into politics has caused a lot of problems when it did. Those things didn't used to be there. And now they're the lightning rod for most of the arguments and raving. So if you can keep that out, I mean, who wouldn't want to balance the budget? I mean, who wouldn't want to have bills passed that help the country move forward as opposed to a deadlock? I mean, I don't understand that. You hear these stories about families that break up over politics. My cousin's a Trump supporter and he doesn't come at Thanksgiving anymore because there's been a rift in the family. How can that tribalism be more important than the family? I can't conceive of that. I don't understand it. There should be a way for family members that have differing political views to reach a consensus. Okay, we're in the same family. So that's irrational stuff that I can't figure out. I can't think that way.
Yeah, I mean that was one of the inspirations for starting this show because so many folks that I knew had kind of seen that or been part of that kind of thing in their life and experienced it. So yeah, and there's a lot of other threads I want to pull there too, but I want to make sure I get this in, which is you paint kind of a bleak picture in the book, and so I guess a couple questions was one is how do you maintain hope, and then can you share any sort of concrete examples of maybe movements out there or something that kind of represent the kind of moral changes you're talking about?
Well, I'm a genetic optimist, so that helps. I believe there's always a solution. I don't know if you look at revolutions throughout history, they're never caused by the middle class. You have to have some intellectual input and then some kind of cause that produces a critical mass of people. But in this case, maybe it's small groups become larger groups. Maybe it's a neighborhood that becomes a community organization, and then there are multiple community organizations, and people just have to stomp their feet and say, enough is enough. We're not accomplishing anything as a country.
Well, and worse, it's worse than not accomplishing anything even, right?
Right.
We're kind of tearing the country apart,
Yes.
and we're certainly headed on that road. Yeah, so I'm going to ask you another question, and I don't exactly know where this will fit in and whether you're even comfortable talking about it. But, my audience it seems about 60-40 blue to red. And when I have spoken with folks that sort of lean to the left, one thing they're really interested in learning more and trying to understand better, like the attitudes and where the right is coming from, I guess, in some sense. And I don't know if you feel comfortable maybe giving us 3 or 4 bits of data along that front.
Sure.
Because I think you can speak to that better than I can.
Well, I wrote one of my books is a conservative gene, so it was really the genetic basis for the behavior of the right. But let me describe myself just for a second there, and I'll answer your question. So I am a genetic conservative, which means I believe in, well, conservatives in general believe in they're loyal to groups. They believe in authority. They accept the fact that society is hierarchical because they think it's natural. So they don't like the idea of equality because that socialists, not all Democrats, but socialists push because they don't think that's possible. To the right, socialism seems like control. So you lose freedom. If a government takes complete control of a society, then there isn't any freedom. But okay, so let's go on to the conservatives. Conservatives like tradition, conservatives like the status quo. And I mean, this works good in society because the left is more interested in change. I mean, just a general personality trait. People on the left travel more than people on the right. They like change. They like things that are new. And so, but given the opportunity, if there was nobody on the right, we would probably go too fast in the wrong direction. Just like if there were no liberals, we'd stagnate because conservatives like the status quo. So they're complementary.
Mm-hmm. And I'm always a little shocked on some issues. There are always these sort of hot button issues, but it seems like we've started to make almost everything a hot button issue, or we try to find a way to make it a hot button issue. When on many things, I think you could easily make a case for it having, for it fitting both, say a conservative set of values and a progressive or a liberal set of values, and or left or right, depending on which sort of phraseology you want to use. And we seem to like try to avoid that practically, to try to turn it into a partisan issue, right, and then pick a side, as opposed to saying, actually, maybe this actually serves both of our value set.
Sure. I want to give you a couple more examples because you said that the majority of your viewers are on the left, and so another couple examples about how the right thinks. I think it's overly generalized to accuse the right of stuff on the cultural side. For example, same-sex marriage. I don't care about same-sex marriage. I don't care if two people want to get married, that's fine. I mean, I'm a conservative, but I think that's fine. I think that's their right to do that. I think the trans thing is a much more complicated issue because you're talking about people getting surgery before they're old enough to make their own decision. Whether an adult wants to change genders, I don't care. I mean, I think most conservatives feel like I want to be left alone to make my choices in life, and that's okay if everybody else does that too. So it's wrong to put all conservatives in a box on cultural issues. I think that's unfair. The other point I'll make about that is just because I'm a conservative doesn't mean I'm a Republican. I'm really a moderate because I throw rocks at both ends and Republicans just as much as I do Democrats for misbehavior as I identify it. Like right now, let me backtrack a little if I got a minute to bring this up. But the problem with conservatism is it's never really had its own ideology because the conservative ideology has always been tradition. That's it. Rather than the left's ideology is collectivism. It's equality. So that's a real ideology. On the right, there isn't any. And during the 60s, before Reagan, Bill Buckley, who I'm sure you're familiar with, really kind of built a Republican ideology by combining traditionalists, libertarians, and former anti-communists who became neocons. So there was for like 20 years, the Republicans had an ideology, but then that withered away since then. There isn't ideology against ideology. It's like you want to change things I don't want to change, basically.
Mm-hmm. All right, Michael. Well, I really appreciate getting a chance to talk with you, and I'll make sure we have links to all of your books on the show notes. And I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Okay, thank you very much for having me. Enjoyed the conversation.
Good. I'm glad you did. Yep. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That is it for this episode of the Outrage Overload podcast. For links to everything we talked about on this episode, go to outrageoverload.net. The outrage machine can leave us feeling drained and hopeless. But remember, you're not powerless. There are ways to break free from the negativity spiral. Let's combat negativity with positivity. We all need a good dose of hope these days, so head over to our social media pages, Facebook or Instagram, @Outrage Overload, and share a positive news story that inspired you. Scroll down in the show notes and find the Send Us a Text Message link. It could be anything, big or small. Let's create a community that uplifts and supports each other in staying off the negativity spiral. Thanks for joining me on this journey. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.